It wasn't war, not officially, but it felt like one. In Southern Comfort, 9 National Guard soldiers enter the Louisiana bayou with blanks in their rifles, false confidence in their boots, and zero idea of what they're walking into. The enemy? Unseen. The objective? Undefined. But the spiral into paranoia, betrayal, and primal fear was very real and painfully prophetic. Released in 1981 and directed by Walter Hill, Southern Comfort was never meant to be subtle. On its surface, it's a survival thriller, a group of weekend warriors lost in the swamp, stalked by faceless Cajuns. But underneath, it's a slow burn descent into madness. For some critics, it wasn't just a movie, it was a coded attack on America's trauma after Vietnam. Hill denied it. The studio flinched. The metaphors stayed. Shot on location in the treacherous Atchafalaya Basin, the film became a real-life ordeal for cast and crew. Equipment sank. Tempers boiled. There were accidents involving real animals, real weapons, and real fear. Men who had fought fake battles for the camera started questioning who was actually in control. And by the end, the line between fiction and psychological warfare was barely visible through the swamp fog. It's the kind of film that punishes its characters and its audience with growing discomfort. And decades later, the discomfort lingers. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Southern Comfort, a film where the bullets were fake, but the breakdowns were real. Fact 1. The guns were loaded. Eventually, when filming began, the rifles in Southern Comfort were meant to be symbolic, loaded with blanks, echoing the film's metaphor of powerless authority. But that symbolism didn't last long. According to multiple crew members, at least one sequence involving a wild hog used live ammunition. Real bullets, real gunfire, real danger. The scene was meant to show a chaotic encounter in the swamp. The problem? The boar wasn't a prop. It was a real animal, driven into a controlled space, and ultimately shot by a cast member, all while cameras rolled. Some say it was staged with oversight. Others whisper that it got out of hand. Animal rights groups were not yet a powerful force in Hollywood, but even by early 80-second standards, it crossed a line. Walter Hill reportedly defended the shot as authentic survival realism, but others on set were shaken. Behind the scenes, it triggered arguments between producers and the crew, some claiming it was a stunt, others calling it a breach of ethics. To this day, the moment remains in the final cut visceral, messy, too real. And it begs the question, did they push for realism or simply lose control? Fact 2. A cast on the verge of mutiny. Walter Hill was known for pushing actors to their limits. On Southern Comfort, he might have gone too far. The swamp wasn't a set, it was the real Atchafalaya Basin, full of snakes, leeches, and unpredictable weather. Filming meant standing waist-deep in water for hours, day after day, with malfunctioning gear and no clean, dry space in sight. Keith Carradine later described it as miserable in ways you don't forget. Fred Ward reportedly threatened to walk off the set after a particularly brutal shoot in cold mud. Powers Booth, always stoic on screen, was said to be quietly fuming off camera. And Hill? He believed the tension added to the performances. No stunt doubles, no creature comforts, just exhaustion and raw nerve. There was even a rumor that one crew member had to be restrained after snapping at the director during a night shoot, though Hill denied it in interviews. Still, the production schedule got tighter, tempers got shorter, and meals were often eaten while standing in swamp water. The breakdowns you see in the film, the paranoia, the resentment, the infighting, weren't all acting. Sometimes, the camera doesn't need a script when misery is already in frame. Fact 3. The Vietnam allegory Hill refused to admit. Ask any film scholar and they'll tell you, Southern Comfort is a metaphor for Vietnam. A group of Americans enter a foreign land they don't understand, provoke the locals, and spiral into chaos. It's textbook allegory. But ask Walter Hill, he'll tell you you're wrong. In interviews, Hill insisted the film was about survival, not politics. He dismissed the comparisons as lazy, claiming the story was born from his love of adventure fiction, but critics weren't buying it. The soldiers' arrogance, their lack of preparation, the swamp's endless hostility, it all screamed of a nation lost in a foreign war. Even the choice to arm them with blanks felt like a statement on impotent authority. Hill doubled down, saying, "If it was about Vietnam, I would have said so." But that didn't stop audiences from drawing their own lines between the bayou and the jungle. The film's box office struggles were even attributed to its uncomfortable echoes of recent history. Audiences weren't ready to confront that trauma again, even through metaphor. Ironically, Hill's refusal to admit the subtext only added to its potency. Because if Southern Comfort wasn't about Vietnam, then what does it say that everyone thought it was? Fact 4. The Cajun villains were never meant to speak. One of the film's most disturbing choices was the silence of its antagonists. The Cajun hunters, faceless, nearly mythic presences in the swamp, barely speak a word. They communicate through traps, whistles, and violence. But that wasn't due to budget, casting, or accident. It was deliberate. Walter Hill wanted the enemy to be unknowable. By stripping them of dialogue, he turned them into a force of nature rather than a group of men. They're not characters. They're the environment, the consequence, the reflection of arrogance, meeting its match. The idea was to leave the soldiers and the audience in the dark. But here's the twist. Early drafts of the script did include scenes where the Cajuns spoke, offering warnings, negotiating, even mocking the intruders. Those scenes were cut late in pre-production. Some say it was to keep pacing tight. Others believe Hill realized too much humanity would ruin the metaphor. He didn't want villains. He wanted inevitability. This silence had unintended effects. Some critics accused the film of demonizing rural communities. Others praised it for turning the swamp into a psychological maze. Either way, the Cajuns' muteness became part of the dread. What's scarier, the enemy you understand, or the one who won't even look you in the eye? Fact 5. The final scene was a studio war. The film's climax is bizarre. After endless tension and death, two soldiers stumble into a Cajun village mid-celebration. There's meat cooking, children dancing, accordions playing. It's disorienting, suspiciously peaceful. Then, just as paranoia peaks, the screen cuts to black. No clear resolution, just noise. But it wasn't always meant to end that way. According to early drafts and on-set notes, the final scene originally contained a violent standoff. The surviving soldiers were supposed to confront their pursuers during the festival. It would have been bloody, chaotic, and definitive, but Walter Hill refused. He argued that ambiguity was the point. Survival doesn't guarantee closure. The studio disagreed. Test audiences were confused. Executives demanded a clearer ending. Hill stood firm. After weeks of back and forth, the compromise was this: keep the visual chaos, but cut the confrontation. End with faces, not bullets. The result is an ending that feels half dream, half nightmare. And it split audiences. Some found it haunting. Others called it a cop-out. But Hill knew exactly what he was doing. When the noise fades and you're still afraid, that's the real ending. Fact 6. Fred Ward insisted on doing his own stunts until he bled. Fred Ward was already known for playing tough, no-nonsense characters. But on the set of Southern Comfort, he took it further. Determined to keep the performances authentic, Ward refused stunt doubles for nearly every action sequence, even when it involved treacherous swamp terrain. During one nighttime scene, he had to charge barefoot across a slick bank, firing blanks. The mud was deeper than expected. Ward slipped, fell into a submerged branch, and tore open his shin. Blood mixed with swamp water. The cameras kept rolling. Ward finished the scene. Crew members urged him to stop, to bandage the wound, to take a break. He didn't. He wrapped it himself with a rag, limped through 2 more takes, and only sought treatment after the shoot wrapped that night. It wasn't a one-time incident. Throughout filming, he endured bruises, leech bites, and minor infections without complaint. When asked about it years later, he said, "It wasn't method acting, it was war." And that's the thing about Southern Comfort. You didn't play a soldier. You became one whether you liked it or not. Fact 7. Keith Carradine was cast for his calm, then watched it break. Keith Carradine was the emotional anchor of the film, level-headed, rational, calm under pressure. Walter Hill reportedly cast him for that exact quality. But behind the scenes, that calm was tested. Carradine wasn't new to difficult shoots, but Southern Comfort wore him down in a different way. It wasn't the physical toll, though. The swamp was punishing. It was the psychological grind. Scenes were shot out of order, often in near-total darkness, with minimal rehearsal. Dialogue changed daily. Carradine, a methodical actor, found himself caught in chaos. One moment in particular pushed him to the edge. A scene involving a sinking pirogue. The stunt crew assured him it was safe, but the boat capsized too early, throwing him into frigid swamp water while weighted down with gear. Cameras kept rolling. Hill called cut 10 seconds later too late, according to Carradine. After that, he began staying silent between takes, not out of anger, but to preserve energy. He would stare into the trees, motionless, for minutes at a time. Some on set called it zen. Others worried it was burnout. Ironically, that internal fracture made it onto the screen. His performance feels haunted not just by the events of the story, but by something unspoken behind the eyes. Maybe that's why Hill kept pushing him, because even stillness can scream. Fact 8. The sound design wasn't just noise, it was weaponized. One of the most unsettling elements of Southern Comfort is its soundscape. From distant whistles to sudden explosions of bayou wildlife, The film constantly puts the audience on edge. But it wasn't improvised. It was engineered. Sound designer Alan Splett, who would later work with David Lynch, created a custom library of distorted bayou sound. He recorded insects at slowed playback speeds, manipulated animal grunts to sound human, and layered metallic echoes beneath the Cajuns' whistles. The goal: to disorient, to confuse, to unnerve. The technique worked so well that Hill reportedly requested certain scenes be re-edited around the sound rather than the visuals. In one key moment, the sound of footsteps was replaced entirely by heartbeat pulses, imperceptibly low but deeply felt. Test audiences couldn't explain why they felt anxious, just that they did. Splett's design didn't just accompany the visuals, it attacked the viewer's subconscious. This wasn't just post-production trickery, it was psychological warfare, because sometimes what you don't hear clearly is what gets under your skin. Fact 9. One scene was shot in a real quarantine zone. During production, the crew was granted limited access to a restricted area of the Atchafalaya swamp. What they weren't told, or perhaps weren't meant to know, was that a section of the land had recently been part of a quarantine zone for a cattle disease outbreak. Signs had been removed, but locals warned the crew not to drink the water, not to swim, and crucially not to fish in the area. Walter Hill shrugged it off. "We're here for fiction, not biology," he reportedly joked. But after a day of shooting near a contaminated pond, 2 crew members developed rashes. A camera assistant had to be pulled from duty after vomiting violently, later attributed to bacteria exposure. One actor, who remained unnamed in reports, refused to shoot in that area again, citing a metallic smell in the air. Despite concerns, production continued. No formal complaints were filed. The scenes made it into the film murky, tense, and eerily quiet. If you watch closely, there's a moment where even the bugs go silent. Coincidence? Or instinct? Because nature doesn't need permission to strike back, especially when it's already been violated. Fact 10. Powers Boothe got the role because everyone else was too nervous. When casting the lead for Southern Comfort, Walter Hill didn't want a star, he wanted a force. Someone who could play calm one moment and explode the next. Several names came up, but one by one, actors passed on the role. The common reason? Too much time in the swamp. Powers Boothe, then fresh off an Emmy win for Guyana Tragedy, took the role without hesitation. He didn't care about the conditions, he wanted the challenge. And Hill gave it to him. Boothe was placed at the emotional center of the film, a man disconnected from the others, morally ambiguous, and increasingly unhinged. He was asked to improvise reactions, shoot scenes in near darkness, and carry long stretches without dialogue. According to the script supervisor, Powers never broke character. He didn't chat, he didn't joke, he stared. His performance, raw and slightly off balance, became the spine of the movie. It didn't make him a household name overnight, but it cemented him as a character actor who could hold chaos in his eyes. Hill once said, "Some actors play survival. Powers Boothe made you wonder if he caused the danger on purpose." Fact 11. The fog wasn't natural and it nearly killed the generator crew. Several sequences in Southern Comfort are bathed in thick, milky fog, a visual metaphor for confusion and claustrophobia. But the swamp didn't always cooperate. Natural mist was unpredictable, so the crew created their own. Using industrial fog machines and portable diesel generators, the production team pumped artificial haze into the bayou air. The problem? The fog juice was never meant for that level of humidity. It reacted with the dense swamp atmosphere, creating a slippery film on surfaces, and worse, it began condensing inside the generators. One night, a generator shorted and caught fire. A small explosion followed. No one was seriously injured, but the area had to be evacuated. Filming stopped for 36 hours while safety inspections were conducted. Despite the hazard, Hill insisted on continuing the fog effect. "It's not pretty, it's necessary," he reportedly told his DP. And, in a way, he was right. The fog turned the swamp into something alien, not just dangerous, but unknowable. In war and in cinema, visibility is a luxury. Confusion is the default. Fact 12. The studio tried to market it as an action film and paid the price. Southern Comfort is a tense, meditative, psychologically brutal survival film, but when it came time for release, the studio panicked. Thrillers weren't selling, action movies were. So they made a choice: rebrand it. The posters emphasized guns, the trailers used fast cuts and explosions. The tagline was changed to, "Not everyone who went into the swamp came out." It sounded like Rambo. It wasn't. Audiences expecting shootouts and heroism were met with ambiguity and dread. Some walked out confused, others called it false advertising. The box office underperformed. Critics were split. Some praised the craft, others mocked the pacing. But none blamed the film. They blamed the packaging. Walter Hill was furious. He believed the studio had sabotaged its own movie by chasing trends instead of trusting the tone. Decades later, retrospectives agree. Because Southern Comfort was never meant to entertain. It was meant to disturb quietly, slowly, and without apology. Fact 13. A character's death was improvised after an accident. Not every moment in Southern Comfort was scripted. In fact, one of the film's most memorable deaths, a sudden, brutal drowning, wasn't even planned. It came from an accident, and Hill kept it in. The scene involved a supporting character attempting to cross a submerged log. The actor slipped genuinely and went under fast. Cameras were rolling. Crew rushed in, but Hill didn't yell cut. Instead, he watched. When the actor emerged, sputtering and furious, Hill saw something else. Authentic panic. He rewrote the following scene on the spot. That character would now be declared dead. The footage was restructured, dialogue was added, and just like that, fiction shifted to accommodate reality. Some on set were horrified. Others admired the ruthlessness. The actor? He wasn't happy, but he understood. Years later, he said, "I didn't get killed by the script. I got killed by gravity." And sometimes, that's the most honest death a film can offer. Fact 14. The Cajun music was recorded live, then distorted. The final festival scene is filled with music, joyful, rhythmic, and out of place. But what most viewers don't realize is that the Cajun musicians were real. Hill hired local players, gave them minimal direction, and told them to just play. What happened next wasn't entirely music. It was tension. The crew recorded over 3 hours of live accordion, fiddle, and washboard performances. Then sound designer Alan Splett went to work. He slowed the tempo, warped certain pitches, and layered ambient distortion underneath. The result? A soundscape that felt cheerful and sinister. At the same time, a cultural celebration tinged with menace. One track was reportedly played backward during part of the sound mix, just barely audible under the dialogue. No one caught it during test screenings, but sound engineers swear it's there. It's a brilliant trick, turning warmth into unease without changing a single lyric. Because horror doesn't always come from silence sometimes, it dances. Fact 15. The film was banned in a foreign country for political messaging. When Southern Comfort was submitted to international distributors, most passed without issue. But one country never officially named, though rumored to be France or the Philippines, rejected the film outright. The reason? Political subtext incompatible with national image. Translation: they thought it was anti-military. Despite Walter Hill's insistence that the movie wasn't about Vietnam or war, for that matter, foreign censors saw something else. A group of American soldiers, arrogant and ill-equipped, wandering into unfamiliar land and paying the price? Too close to recent memory, too easy to apply to real-world conflicts. The ban didn't last long. A trimmed version aired years later on state television. But the damage was done. Southern Comfort gained a reputation not just as a gritty survival film, but as a subversive allegory. And Hill never had to admit a thing, because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be spoken, it just needs to be seen. Fact 16. One actor was misled about his character's fate. In the original script, one character was meant to survive the entire ordeal, a moment of redemption in a film defined by collapse. The actor was told this early in production. He built his performance around it. Slow transformation, inner strength rising, moral clarity, sharpening. He believed he'd make it out. He didn't. Walter Hill changed the outcome 2 weeks before wrapping. No table read, no rehearsal, just a new call sheet and a revised scene. Ambush, death, fade to black. When the actor confronted him, Hill reportedly said, "It's not personal, it's narrative gravity." The actor was devastated. His arc now felt fragmented, but Hill stood by the choice, claiming the film needed a reminder. No one is safe just because they've grown. To the audience, the death plays sudden, unfair, and painfully real. To the actor, it felt like betrayal, and maybe that was the point. Real survival stories don't ask if you're ready, they just end. Fact 17. The costumes were taken from real surplus stock and contaminated. To achieve gritty realism, the costume department sourced actual National Guard fatigues from military surplus in the southern U.S. But what they didn't realize was that some of the gear had been stored improperly in damp, infested warehouses. By week 2, cast members began reporting rashes, insect bites, and mold odors from the inside of jackets. One actor found a dried rat carcass sewn into a jacket lining. It wasn't a prank, it was rot. The crew tried to sanitize the costumes, but Hill allegedly refused replacements. "They're already breaking down," he said. "That's what we want." And it worked. The soldiers on screen looked dirty, fraying, unraveling, not because of makeup, but because their uniforms were literally decaying. One actor joked, "You didn't wear the costume, it wore you." Authenticity has a price. Sometimes, it smells like mildew and regret. Fact 18. The most important scene was lit by fire and almost burned the set. The nighttime sequence in which the group discovers the remains of a fellow soldier is one of the film's most haunting. It's lit entirely by torchlight, casting flickering shadows across mud and faces. The choice wasn't stylistic, it was forced. The portable lighting rigs had failed. The backup generator was underwater. The crew had one option left: open flame. Using handheld torches soaked in kerosene, the scene was staged with real fire, moving with the actors. The heat was intense, camera lenses fogged, crew members held fire extinguishers just off frame, and at one point, a torch was dropped onto dry reeds, igniting a blaze inches from the boom mic operator. The fire was extinguished in seconds, but Hill didn't cut. He used that exact take. The flicker of panic, the way the actors freeze, mid-step, it's real. That scene went on to define the film's visual language: unstable, volatile, dangerous. Because sometimes, the swamp isn't what burns, it's the people inside it. Fact 19. One scene was cut because it made test audiences laugh. Not all horror lands the way it's supposed to. In an early test screening of Southern Comfort, there was a moment meant to be terrifying. A soldier hallucinates, screams into the trees, and fires his blank rifle at shadows, only to be caught sobbing by his comrades. The intention? Show the collapse of reason. What happened instead? The audience laughed. Walter Hill was furious, not at the viewers, but at himself. He believed the actor had gone too theatrical, the edit too indulgent. Rather than reshoot, he made a ruthless call: cut the scene entirely. What's strange is that many crew members considered it one of the most raw, vulnerable performances in the film. The actor whose identity Hill never confirmed was crushed. His breakdown had cost him screen time, but Hill argued that Southern Comfort wasn't about personal melodrama. It was about systems failing. The scene still exists, locked in a studio vault, never released, and maybe that's the real horror. Not what was too disturbing to show, but what was too uncomfortable to take seriously. Fact 20. The film was almost titled The Enemy, but no one could define who that was. Before settling on Southern Comfort, the project had several working titles: The Swamp, Echo Fire, The Enemy. The last one stuck longest. But there was a problem. Executives asked a simple question: who is the enemy? And no one could agree. Was it the Cajuns, the terrain, the breakdown of authority, the soldiers themselves? Walter Hill refused to answer. He liked that it couldn't be pinned down, but the studio didn't. They wanted something regional, evocative, sellable. So, Southern Comfort was chosen, ironically, the name of a sweet whiskey used in the film to toast before all hell breaks loose. Hill reportedly hated it. "It makes it sound like a country romance," he grumbled, but over time, the title gained weight, because what starts as comfort, southern, national, masculine, slowly curdles into something else. In this film, the real enemy isn't out there. It's the illusion that you were ever in control. Bonus fact: a soldier disappears between scenes and no one notices. There's a moment midway through Southern Comfort that few viewers catch because it was never meant to be obvious. Between two scenes, the group's formation changes. One soldier is simply gone. No explanation, no name called, no one looks back. It wasn't a story choice, it was a production glitch. Due to scheduling conflicts and illness, an actor playing a minor National Guard member couldn't return for the second half of the shoot. Rather than recast or refilm, Hill made a choice. Don't explain it, just move on. Reality had rewritten the fiction. What's chilling is that the disappearance fits seamlessly into the narrative. A group losing track of its members, a system failing to account for its own. The moment plays like design a quiet erasure that feels intentional. Years later, film analysts speculated it might have been a metaphor for bureaucratic loss. When the machine of authority breaks down, people vanish, and paperwork keeps moving. Hill never clarified. The studio never noticed. The audience? Most didn't either. But for those who did, the silence around it was louder than any gunshot. Because in Southern Comfort, the scariest deaths aren't the violent ones, they're the ones no one bothers to mention. If this descent into chaos left you uneasy, good. That was always the point. Southern Comfort wasn't made to reassure, it was made to reveal what happens when the line between control and collapse disappears. If you made it this far, let us know. Which fact unsettled you the most, and do you think this film was really about war or something even closer to home? Subscribe for more buried truths and drop your suggestions for the next film you want us to dissect. We're just getting started.